What is up, everybody? Svend here with Sportsman's Warehouse. We're tying up an old school streamer. It's a combination of a lot of patterns, but let's get started with the hook first. This is a TMC 9395 and a 4X long hook. You can also go upwards of 6X to 9X. We got some uni thread and a 6/0 in black. It helps to have black for the head, and we're going to be using some uni floss in Chinese red. You could use a number of bright colors as well. And for our tinsel, we're using a large mylar tinsel. It's gold on the one side, silver on the other. You could also use a medium as well. And we're going to be using for our throat the mallard flank, and this is in a burnt orange-ish brown color. And we're going to be using for our wing, this is some strung rooster saddle. These are feathers that I typically don't use for wings, but that will work in this particular scenario. So let's go ahead and get started on this. We are going to be inserting this hook, and like I said, this is just an old school streamer, a wet fly. You could swing it, you could strip it. It's basically going to have a wing and a throat and some color and some flash. So let's go ahead and get started with our thread and basically start your way down the shank of the hook with about an eye and a half length. We want to limit the amount of thread we put right behind the eye. And the first material, we're going to grab off about 6 to 7 inches of this tinsel. Usually I'm tying up multiples of these, and so I reuse it, but it also helps for when we're ribbing this fly to have a little bit extra. And when we're doing these slender bodies, you want to make sure that you tie in your materials with uniformity. And we're going to basically be using this tinsel along the whole shank of the hook so that we're not creating a step. We want to minimize that. And I'm using touching wraps as I go down. And this thread is a particular, it's kind of perfect for this because it's stacking right next to each other. Sometimes I'll stop and untwist it, but you can see it's laying down really, really nice. And I'm going to stop right before the point of the hook. And then I will basically create our tag end here with the silver facing outward, and I'm going to wrap with overlapping wraps backwards into the bend about the length of the from the point to the barb, maybe a little bit further than the barb. You can vary your tag ends, of course, or some may call it a hot spot, and then I'll work my way back up to my thread, and then we will go ahead and tie this off but not cut it out. So I'm just going to do 2 loose wraps right here behind this, and then as we come in front, make sure that thread didn't jump on us. Notice how I'm keeping tension on that tinsel the whole time, and I'll do a couple wraps backwards over that, and then wrap all my way back up to the hook eye with touching wraps. And like I said, if you're having problems with the thread, what's the right word? If your thread is corded, there we go. If it's corded, you want to stop and untwist it, and so it's laying as flat as possible. But you can see with this size denier, it's not going to make a huge difference. And I don't think the fish are going to particularly care. And if you notice any humps, I like to use my scissors for this. I just kind of rub it along here. It kind of flattens out your thread a little bit more. But we are pretty good at this point. So I'm going to get that tinsel out of the way. It helps to have hair clips handy, and we're going to be tying in our floss now. I want to take about 8 inches and double that, so we got about 16, maybe 15 inches of floss here. And I'm going to simply fold it in half. And use this looped end, so not our tag ends, and I'll tie that in right here. The reason I do that is if you tie in your tag ends, when you get to the end of your floss, it could create a little bit of a hump, and so by doing this, our ends are loose. And you'll notice how I loosely wrap that first wrap and then crank down and separate those floss as I come around. And as I'm stroking this, working my way around, I'm actually sliding it through my fingers, allowing it to lay more flat than corded. This definitely does help at this point, focusing on flatter wraps. As I come around, you can see how it's flattening down, because we do want this to create that uniform body. And as we get back here to the tag end, I'll pull that back, the tinsel, wrap straight down, and then come back over and wrap up towards the eye again. And we are just doing this in a double layer. For a couple reasons. One, it helps cover any gaps you had if you do have one, so you don't see that black thread. And secondly, it helps to create a more uniform body and also makes it a little bit bolder of a color underwater as well if you're using some other colors that might, one layer would be more transparent. And so we doubled that up, and notice how I still leave that gap of a full hook eye there, because we're going to be tying in a few other materials, so I don't want to crowd that now. And we'll go ahead and trim out that floss. So the little trick here I have is to minimize this hump is I kind of wrap back over, so half of that is on the tinsel and half is on the floss, and then I just work my way around and then come up. And if you notice any inconsistencies, I had a little spot there I didn't like, just use your scissors to kind of just smooth that out. Don't work it too much because you could burr it. And then we want to just palmer this tinsel up with pretty snug wraps and evenly space them as you work your way up. And then as we get up towards the eye, I'm going to do a full wrap around my black threaded area at this point, so right behind the eye, and I'll go ahead and just tie that off, covering it with some wraps behind and wraps in front, and we have our body now. That is looking phenomenal. And if you have struggle with uniformity, you can always back that off and redo it as many times as you can. And we're going to use this mallard flank, and as you can see, this is a really good piece. I want to make sure that these fibers are a little, almost the length of the hook, but I want them to, when we're finished, I want them to extend into that hook point. And I'm going to go ahead and back up my thread just a little bit and tie in the tip of this feather. And I just created a little notch here. I pulled some of the fibers back, and I'm tying in the tip of this stem, and it is a little fragile, so you got to be a little bit careful with this. We'll trim out the tip, and then with thread tension, making sure that we're not going to have that feather pop out as we palmer this, I'm going to wrap down and then come up around, stroking those fibers backwards as I come up and over, and then trying my best not to trap any going forward. And I want to get about 3 or 4 wraps. This feather is a phenomenal feather, probably much better than, this is probably one of the better feathers in the pack, so I was pretty lucky to pull this one out first. And then as we get up here towards the hook eye, I'm going to tie off that stem with a wrap behind. I'll do a couple wraps in front, working my thread through those fibers, and then try and get another one back behind. And if you've got a rotary vise or a vise that rotates, that really helps so you can see the other side. And then we'll trim out that stem, being very careful not to cut our thread. And then I'm going to pull all these fibers back, and as I do, we're going to basically divide them over the body, so the half are on each side, and they're fanning kind of, from, if you took a center line of that hook shank, I want them to be on the bottom half, splaying on each side, and I'll pinch those and then wrap about halfway over what we just palmered in, so that those fibers are kind of going down. If you've got a straggler, you can try and get it down with your thread. Oftentimes I just cut them out. And we now have our throat. So there we go. That is looking pretty awesome. I love mallard for this because it's, you got that barring. You could also use a material like bucktail. But now we're going to form our wing. And I'm going to use 2 feathers from this olive. And I want to get a feather that isn't quite super, super pointy. I want it to be a little bit more rounded at the tip. Not like a soft hackle, but these are rooster feathers. And so we're just trying to select one that isn't as pointy for the structure of our wing. And if you've never done these wings before, I'm not the best at it, but it's something that practice, the more you practice, the better you can become at it. And so we're just going to line up those tips, making sure that they are concaving towards each other, because the feathers naturally contour, have kind of a curvature to them, and I want them to curve into each other, and I want it to extend out past the hook bend, about the width of the bend, the hook gap there. And then I'm going to help myself out. I'm going to preen off the fluff after I measured them, and then in order to kind of get it to lay a little bit more flat, I need to take a little bit off this underside, because if we tied it in just like that, it would stick back at almost a 45-degree angle. I'll pinch them in place, wrap up and over, and then get 2 nice wraps, and we will check to see how it looks. So that's sitting up just a little bit. I'm going to try repositioning it real fast, try pulling the stems to each side, see how I like it. And that's up just a little bit much for my liking. See, we're going to have to undo this and we'll probably have to do it again. But let me see if I wrap back over it a little bit further, if it will go down to where I want it. That's pretty good. But let me show you here. If you have this problem, you want to take a little bit from that underside, and I'll show you. All you got to do is unwrap it. These feathers are still really awesome. They're in good shape. We haven't ruined them by tying that in. I'm just going to pull them off, keeping them pinched together, and pull a few more fibers off. Not a lot. 3 or 4 fibers does quite a bit. If I was to pull 6 or 8, it would almost lay flat on that hook shank. And so I want it to be puffed up just a little bit. And so we'll do the same process. I'll wrap up and over with 2 or 3 wraps, checking to make sure that we're right in the middle, pulling those stems out to each side of the hook shank. And that one kind of twisted on me. So you can see this isn't something that, if you struggle with this, that is more than perfect, or that's fine. Every feather is going to be a little bit more difficult. Some feathers will be easy, some will be hard. I'm going to try for a third time here. No, we might be there. Let me see. Oh yeah, that's looking pretty good. So we'll trim out those. So I don't need to try a third time. That worked out pretty good. Those feathers are curving into each other. It's puffed up to about a 20-degree angle coming off the back. You can see right there, right in next to each other. And so now I'll just really secure that. And I like the way those turned out. So now we're going to do a secondary and outer wing, and you'll see this on a lot of traditional salmon flies and such, where you're coming over this underwing with another molted feather or something that provides more structure and protects the fly. You could also use the same color and just do 4 feathers, tying in 2 on each side at once, but I've opted to go with a different color, and this is a white silver, and we're going to be doing the same process, but I want these to be a little bit shorter. And you can, with some of these, some materials, you can lay this over the top and tie it in. I'm just going to position them on each side. I found that to be a little beneficial for me personally, but I want to make sure I have them concaving the correct way, so you can see that feather, how it's leaning that way. It needs to be on this side, and then of course the other feather will be on the opposing side, curving into that center wing, and we're just going to have them be a little bit shorter. And so I'll just go ahead and position that, and we'll pinch it with my left hand right there. And we see how we got both stems coming out to each side, and I want them to be a little bit more in the center, almost like they're V'ing out from the center point to the outer wing. And there we go. Let's just get this stem going the right way, and it's right there on the center. I'll pinch it, and that looks pretty good. Check the length, and we'll go ahead and do some tight, snug securing wraps there, and then we'll check it. So right there, just perfect. A little bit shorter than our olive wing. They're splaying out to each side, and I really like how that turned out. So like I said, this isn't a particular, maybe there's a name for this. This is just an old school pattern. I have luck with red underbodies, and I love olive in silver and white in the mallard, and it just flows really nice. The last step is we're going to do a whip finish, making sure that we build up a little black head. That's about where you want it to be. So now you know why we left that space, but for hook eye, because we built up quite a number of materials there, especially with the mallard. And I'll just do a single turn whip finish because we're going to be using some UV resin for this. You can also use some hard as whole or some sort of head cement, and I'm just going to use some Loon Flow, and I might have grabbed an empty bottle. Yep, looks like this one's empty. I apologize about that. There's nothing left in here. I've tied too many flies. So I'm just going to grab, I've got another bottle here that has a little bit of a brush on it, and I'll just go ahead and brush this as I work my way around, covering the entire head, trying not to get as much into those feathers as possible. We just need this head, and that's going to soak in for a second, and I'll let it cure. Hit it with a UV light for about 10 to 15 seconds. You can see that wing is just really awesome. I love the contrasting colors of this, and it's going to be, that also helps protect it as well. So we'll go ahead and do a second coat. Sometimes if I'm doing certain flies, I'll do upwards of 3 or 4 coats, but we're going to probably be good with just the 2 right there. So A lot of fun to tie this. Like I said, you can tie it on some longer 6 to 9x hooks. There's a lot of more materials you could tie in. Some eyes. You could tie in different sorts of wing material, different throat material. You could add some bucktail in the wing for structure on the throat. So tie some up, have some fun with it, and hope this helps you in tying some older patterns. So thanks for watching.